The red dust of Mars swirled outside the dome of Colony 7, but inside, life continued as usual. Emma Wilson sat at her desk, her small fingers carefully coloring a picture of Earth, a planet she had never seen except in videos and photos. She was one of only 12 children in the entire colony, born on Mars 8 years ago during the first wave of successful births on the red planet. Her father, Robert, worked in the hydroponics section, making sure the colony's food supply remained stable. Her mother, Mary, managed the colony's communication systems. They were a typical Mars family, living their lives under the protective shield that kept them safe from the harsh Martian environment. That morning started like any other. Emma ate her breakfast of lab-grown pancakes, watched the sun rise through the filtered dome windows, and prepared for her daily lessons. But everything changed when the colony's alert system activated with a soft, pulsing blue light, the signal for an unscheduled ship approach. "All residents, please remain calm," the colony AI announced. "Unknown vessels have entered Mars orbit. First contact protocols are now in effect." Emma pressed her face against the classroom window, watching as 3 massive ships descended from the orange sky. They were nothing like the Earth ships she was used to seeing. These were organic-looking, with surfaces that seemed to shift and move like liquid metal. The colony's adults gathered in the main hall, while the children were kept in the school section under their teachers' watchful eyes. Through the windows, Emma could see the ships landing in the designated contact zone, just outside the colony's perimeter. They waited for hours. Emma drew pictures of the ships while her teacher tried to keep the class calm. Finally, the colony AI announced that the visitors were peaceful and that initial contact had been successful. The aliens called themselves the Tall Ones, and they were exactly that. Beings that stood nearly 12 feet high, with silvery skin that reflected light like polished metal. They moved with an odd grace that made them look like they were floating rather than walking. The colony leadership decided to show the aliens that humans were a family-oriented species. They arranged a careful meeting where colony families could greet their visitors. Each family would approach the designated meeting area, supervised by both human security and alien guards. Emma held her parents' hands as they walked toward the meeting point. She was wearing her best red dress, the one her grandmother had sent from Earth, and her dark hair was neatly braided. The Tall Ones watched with what seemed like curiosity, their large, pearl-like eyes reflecting the Martian sunlight. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, witnesses had trouble agreeing on the exact sequence of events. Emma, excited by the sight of the aliens, let go of her parents' hands and took 2 steps forward. One of the alien guards, startled by her sudden movement, raised what looked like an ornate staff. There was a flash of blue light. Emma's small body crumpled to the ground before anyone could react. Her red dress spread out around her like a flower blooming on the steel floor of the meeting area. The silence that followed lasted only a fraction of a second, but it felt like an eternity. Mary's scream shattered that silence. It was a sound that would haunt both humans and aliens for years to come. The primal cry of a mother watching her child die. Robert fell to his knees beside Emma's body, his hands shaking as he tried to find a pulse that was no longer there. The alien guard who had fired the shot stood frozen, its silvery skin turning a pale, sickly white. The other Tall Ones stepped back, their bodies emanating waves of distress that humans would later learn was their species' expression of horror. Colony 7 sirens began to wail, their sound mixing with Mary's continued screams. Security teams from both species converged on the scene, but it was too late. Emma Wilson, one of the first children born on Mars, was gone. The incident that would change 2 species forever had begun, and nobody, human or alien, was prepared for what would follow. The next few hours in Colony 7 passed in a blur of activity and raw emotion. Emergency lockdown protocols activated automatically, thick metal shields sliding down over the colony's dome. The software of the shields closing was drowned out by the continued wail of sirens and the sound of running feet as colonists rushed to their designated safety zones. In the medical bay, Dr. Thomas stood over Emma's small body, his weathered face pale, and his hands trembling slightly as he officially declared her death. Mary and Robert sat in the corner, holding each other. They hadn't spoken a word since their daughter's body had been brought in. The silence between them was heavier than Mars gravity. Outside the medical bay, Colony 7 transformed into a military operations center. Commander Lisa Reed, the highest-ranking military officer on Mars, took control of the situation. Her voice was steady as she sent messages to Earth, but her eyes burned with a cold fury that made her subordinates step carefully around her. "This is Mars Colony 7 declaring a code black," she transmitted. "I repeat, code black. We have lost a child. Request immediate military response." The Tall One's ships remained where they had landed, their metallic surfaces reflecting the red Martian sunset. Inside their vessels, a different kind of chaos was unfolding. First Speaker, the leader of their expedition, had called an emergency council. "I don't understand," the guard who had fired the shot said. His silvery skin still sickly white, the small one moved suddenly. "I followed standard defense protocols." First Speaker's outer membrane rippled with distress. "You fool," it said, using their species' formal speech patterns. "That was not an attack. That was a child. A human child." The council chamber filled with the low-frequency hum that indicated severe distress among their kind. They had studied humans before making contact, but nothing in their research had prepared them for the intensity of human emotional responses. Through their ship's sensors, they watched as Earth's response began. Military vessels, hidden in strategic positions throughout the solar system, started moving toward Mars. The Tall One's tactical computers calculated the humans' military strength and found it far greater than their initial estimates. Back in the colony, Commander Reed received the first response from Earth. The message was short: "All available forces en route. Hold position. Protect the colony. The Third Fleet will arrive in 6 hours." In the residential section, other parents held their children close, watching the news feeds with fear and anger. The remaining 11 children in the colony were moved to the central bunker, surrounded by the heaviest security the colony could provide. The Tall Ones attempted to send a message of apology, but Commander Reed refused to acknowledge their transmissions. Instead, she ordered all communication arrays to focus on military channels. The colonists could feel the tension building like a physical presence in the air. Mary and Robert finally left the medical bay, walking slowly back to their quarters. As they passed Emma's room, Mary stopped. Her hand touched the door panel, and it slid open with a soft hiss. Everything was exactly as Emma had left it that morning. Her bed unmade, her favorite stuffed elephant sitting on the pillow, and her half-finished drawing of the alien ship still on her desk. Mary picked up the drawing with trembling hands. The aliens were depicted in bright silver crayon, surrounded by stars and hearts. Emma had been excited to meet them, had seen them as something wonderful and new. The irony of it broke something in Mary, and she sank to her knees, clutching the drawing to her chest. Robert stood in the doorway, watching his wife grieve. His face showed no emotion, but his hands were clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles had turned white. In his pocket, his personal tablet buzzed with messages from Earth, his parents, his friends, all expressing shock and condolences. He ignored them all. Outside, the Martian night fell, and 2 species waited in fear and uncertainty for what the coming dawn would bring. The humans, for the first time since landing on Mars, had closed all their observatory domes. They didn't want to see the stars tonight. The Tall One's chief researcher, observer, stood before the emergency council, its silver skin pulsing with waves of distress as it shared its findings. The data projected in the chamber told a story that none of them had expected. Humans reproduce slowly, observer explained, its translator converting the thought patterns into human speech. A female typically bears only 1 or 2 offspring in their entire life. Each child represents years of resources, care, and emotional investment. The council chamber filled with the low hum of horror as the implications became clear. In their species, Offspring came in groups of thousands, with only the strongest surviving. The loss of one or even hundreds was natural, expected. But humans. There's more, Observer continued. Their young require years of care before reaching maturity. During this time, they form neural bonds that our species cannot fully comprehend. The death of a child causes severe psychological trauma to the parents and the entire social group. First speaker moved forward, its towering form casting shadows in the dim light. Show us the brain scans. The projection changed to show human neural patterns. The first image showed normal human brain activity. The second showed the patterns from the parents after their child's death. The difference was shocking. Areas of the brain were lit up in patterns the tall ones had never seen before. This is what humans call grief, Observer explained. But it's more than emotional pain. Their bodies physically change. Their brain chemistry alters. And most importantly, Observer paused, its skin turning almost white. They never forget. Ever. In the colony, unaware of the aliens' growing understanding, the human military presence continued to build. The Third Fleet had arrived, their ships taking up orbital positions around Mars. More ships were coming. Commander Reed stood in the colony's main control room, watching the tactical displays. A message from Fleet Admiral Torres appeared on her screen. Rules of engagement received from Earth Command. Authorization for full military response granted. Waiting for your signal. Reed's finger hovered over the response button when another message appeared. This one was from the Tall Ones, marked as urgent. Against her better judgment, she opened it. The message contained detailed files about the alien species, their biology, their social structure, their way of thinking. Everything they had never shared before. And most importantly, their admission of complete ignorance about human children. They're trying to understand, Dr. Thomas said, looking at the files. He had been called to review the biological data. They genuinely didn't know what they had done. In their ships, the Tall Ones continued their research, growing more horrified with each new discovery. They learned about human birthday parties, about first steps and first words, about parents keeping locks of their children's hair and first drawings. They learned about human marriage customs, about how pairs bonded for life to raise their precious few offspring. They watched videos of human children playing, learning, growing. They saw what Emma Wilson might have become, what future she might have had. The guard who had fired the shot watched these videos repeatedly, its body growing paler with each viewing, until other guards worried it might die from stress. First speaker called another emergency session. We have made a mistake beyond calculation, it announced. In all our travels, in all our encounters with other species, we have never found one that values their young as humans do. We have not just killed a child. We have destroyed something they consider sacred. The Council's worry was palpable. Their sensors showed more human ships arriving every hour. Their calculations suggested that Earth was mobilizing its entire military force, something unprecedented in human history. What can we do? One council member asked, its voice trembling. First speaker looked at the latest neural scans from the colony. The patterns of grief and rage were spreading, infecting not just the parents but every human who heard about Emma's death. We must do something no Tall One has ever done before, first speaker said. We must learn to feel what they feel. And then, we must beg for forgiveness. The Tall One's sensors detected it first, a change in the electromagnetic fields surrounding the human colony. Their scientists initially thought it was a weapons system powering up, but Observer quickly realized the truth was far more terrifying. It's coming from their bodies, Observer reported to the Council, its silver skin rippling with fear. Every human in the colony is producing high levels of adrenaline, cortisol, and other stress hormones. Their collective emotional state is actually affecting our instruments. First speaker watched the data streams with growing alarm. In the week since Emma's death, the humans' grief had not diminished as expected. Instead, it had transformed into something else, something their species had never encountered before. The human military ships in orbit had gone silent. Not just communications silent, but energy silent. They were running dark, using minimum power, making themselves nearly invisible to sensors. It was a hunting technique that the Tall Ones recognized from Earth's apex predators. Inside Colony 7, Commander Reed received a message from Earth that made her sit up straight in her chair. "All colonies have gone dark," she read aloud to her staff. "Every human settlement in the solar system has shut down external communications and activated combat protocols. Earth has authorized Operation Swift Response." The Tall Ones detected the change immediately. One by one, human outposts across the solar system disappeared from their scans. It was as if humanity was slowly vanishing, like a predator concealing itself before an attack. In their quarters, Robert and Mary Wilson sat in Emma's room, as they had every night since her death. But tonight was different. Mary held a tablet showing messages from other colonies. Parents offering condolences, sharing their own stories of their children, expressing their rage at Emma's death. They all shut down their observatories, Robert said quietly, reading the messages. "Every colony, every station. No human in the solar system wants to look at the stars right now." The Tall Ones' predictive models were showing patterns that defied their understanding. Humans were acting as one, moving with a coordination that shouldn't have been possible without central control. Their ships were taking positions that made no tactical sense, until Observer ran a simulation that included Earth's entire fleet. "They're not positioning ships," Observer reported, its voice trembling. "They're building a cage. Around us, around Mars, around everything." First speaker called an emergency session of the Council. The chamber's walls displayed sensor data showing the human fleet's movements. The pattern was unmistakable. Earth's ships were creating a blockade that would trap the Tall Ones in the Mars system. "Their technology is more advanced than we thought," one council member noted, its skin pulsing with fear. "They hid their true capabilities from us." "No," first speaker corrected. "They didn't hide anything. We simply failed to understand what humans become when they're protecting their young." In the colony's medical bay, Dr. Thomas was reviewing the latest scans of the colonists. The changes in their brain chemistry were unprecedented. Grief was turning into something else, a cold, focused rage that spread from person to person like a virus. The Tall One's guard who had fired the shot requested permission to observe the colony again. Through the ship's sensors, it watched Robert Wilson working in the hydroponics section. The human's movements were precise, controlled, but his eyes had changed. They were no longer the eyes of a civilian scientist. They were the eyes of something ancient and dangerous. "They're changing," the guard reported back. "All of them. They're becoming something else." First speaker received the report with growing dread. Their species had encountered many civilizations, some peaceful, some warlike. But they had never seen this, an entire species transforming itself in response to the death of a single child. The warning signs were clear. Humanity wasn't just preparing for war. They were becoming war itself. First speaker stood before the colony's main communication screen, its towering form bent slightly, a posture of submission that no Tall One had ever shown to another species. The screen remained dark. This was the 15th attempt to contact the colony in the past hour. "Please," first speaker transmitted again. "We request an audience. We offer our deepest regrets. We wish to make amends." Inside the colony's control room, Commander Reed watched the alien leader's repeated attempts to communicate. Her hand rested on the switch that would activate the screen. Behind her, Robert and Mary Wilson stood silently, their faces showing no emotion. "They've been trying for hours," Dr. Thomas said softly. "Their vital signs show extreme distress. They're literally making themselves sick with worry." Reed finally pressed the button. The screen flickered to life, showing first speaker and the entire alien council. The Tall One's silver skin rippled with relief at the sight of the humans, but that relief quickly faded when they saw the cold expressions facing them. "Speak," Reed commanded. First speaker moved forward. We offer everything we have, it said, its translator converting the thoughts into clear English. Our medical technology can extend human life by centuries. Our energy systems can power your colonies for millennia. Our ships can take you to the stars. We don't want your technology, Mary Wilson said, her voice quiet but sharp enough to make the aliens flinch. We want our daughter back. The guard who had fired the shot stepped forward, its normally silver skin almost white. I am the one who took your child's life, it said. By our laws, my life is yours to take. I offer myself willingly. Robert Wilson looked at the guard for a long moment. Would your death bring Emma back? He asked. When the guard remained silent, he continued. Would it make her laugh again? Would it let her grow up? Would it let her have her own children someday? The alien sensors detected increased military activity in orbit. More Earth ships were arriving every hour. The blockade was almost complete. Soon, the tall ones would be entirely trapped in the Mars system. First speaker made a gesture that caused gasps among its own people. It lowered itself to the ground, pressing its head against the floor, the ultimate sign of submission in their culture. We did not understand, it said, its voice trembling. We had never encountered a species that values their young as you do. We had never known what it means to love a child. The entire alien council followed their leader's example, bowing down before the screen. It was a sight unprecedented in their history. Their entire leadership prostrating themselves before another species. We offer more than technology, first speaker continued. We offer to learn, to understand, to change our entire species so that we never make such a terrible mistake again. We beg not just for forgiveness, but for teaching. Mary stepped closer to the screen. Teaching? She asked. Yes, first speaker replied. Teach us how to feel what you feel. Show us what it means to love a child. Help us understand what we have taken from you, so we can spend the rest of our existence trying to make amends. In orbit, Admiral Torres watched the exchange from the fleet's flagship. Her finger rested on the button that would signal the attack to begin. The entire human fleet waited for her command. Commander Reed looked at the Wilsons. This moment would determine the fate of two species. The tall ones waited in terrified silence, their bodies trembling with fear and genuine remorse. Mary Wilson took a deep breath. She reached into her pocket and pulled out Emma's last drawing, the one showing the tall ones surrounded by stars and hearts. She held it up to the screen. Our daughter, she said, her voice breaking, wanted to be friends with you. She drew this the morning you killed her. If you want to make amends, you need to understand what this picture meant, what she meant. First speaker looked at the child's drawing, and for the first time in its species history, it felt something new, something human. A single drop of liquid rolled down its metallic face. The medical bay of Colony 7 had never held such an unusual group. Mary and Robert Wilson sat facing first speaker and the guard who had killed their daughter. Dr. Thomas stood nearby, monitoring both species with his instruments. Commander Reed watched from the corner, her hand never far from her weapon. These are human tears, Dr. Thomas explained, showing the aliens a sample under a microscope. They're produced by strong emotions, grief, joy, pain, love. Until now, we thought we were the only species that cried. First speaker touched the dried tear track on its own face with wonder. We are changing, it said. Since seeing the child's drawing, many of us have experienced this. We don't understand how or why. You're learning empathy, Mary said quietly. Real empathy, not just understanding. You're learning to feel what we feel. The guard who had fired the shot hadn't moved or spoken since entering the room. Its skin had taken on a grayish tone that worried even its own people. Finally, it spoke. I see her in my dreams, it said. I didn't know we could dream before this, but I see her face every time I rest. Is this what human guilt feels like? Robert nodded slowly. It's part of it. We call it conscience. The ability to understand the pain we cause others, to feel remorse for our actions. In orbit, Admiral Torres received an unexpected message from the Tall One ships. Their crews were experiencing mass psychological changes. Many were producing tear-like secretions. Others reported seeing visions of human children in their rest periods. Their entire species was undergoing a fundamental transformation. Back in the medical bay, Dr. Thomas's instruments detected something extraordinary. The brain patterns, he said, staring at his screens. They're synchronizing. Human and alien brain waves are beginning to match. First speaker turned to the Wilsons. "We cannot undo what was done," it said, "but we are learning. Every moment we spend with humans teaches us more about love, about pain, about the preciousness of life. We are becoming something new." Mary reached into her pocket and pulled out another of Emma's drawings, this one showing a human family holding hands. "Tell me what you see," she said, holding it up. The alien studied the simple crayon drawing. "I see bonds," first speaker said slowly. "Lines of love connecting each figure. I feel warmth, protection, safety." It paused, touching its face as another tear fell. "I understand now. Each child is a universe of possibilities. We didn't just take a life. We took all the love she would have given, all the things she would have created, all the people she would have become." The guard moved forward suddenly, causing Commander Reed to raise her weapon. But the alien simply knelt before the Wilsons. "I offer more than my life," it said. "I offer my eternal service. Let me spend the rest of my existence protecting human children. Let others of my kind learn from my mistake." Robert looked at the kneeling alien for a long moment. "Revenge won't bring Emma back," he said finally. "But maybe understanding can prevent this from happening again." Dr. Thomas's instruments began beeping rapidly. "The synchronization is spreading," he announced. "It's affecting all the Tall Ones in the system. They're all experiencing the same neurological changes." First speaker's skin rippled with new colors, patterns that had never been seen in their species before. "We are becoming something new," it said. "Something that can feel as humans feel. The change cannot be undone. We will never be the same." Mary stood up, still holding Emma's drawing. "No parent should ever feel this pain," she said. "Not human, not alien, not any species anywhere. If you truly want to make amends, help us protect all children, everywhere." The guard looked up, its eyes meeting Mary's. "We swear it," it said, and for the first time, its voice carried the weight of true emotion. "By everything we are becoming, we swear it." Outside the medical bay, the news spread through both human and alien communities. Something unprecedented was happening. Two species were learning to share not just knowledge or technology, but the very essence of what it meant to feel, to love, to understand. 1 year after Emma Wilson's death, Mars Colony 7 looked very different. A new structure stood near the main dome, a building that combined human and alien architecture. Its walls were made of the Tall One's living metal, but shaped into warm, curved forms that felt welcoming to human eyes. Above its entrance, written in both human and alien script, were the words, "The Emma Wilson Memorial Center for Interspecies Understanding." Inside, Robert Wilson stood before a group of young Tall Ones, teaching them about human children. The aliens, only recently hatched, were the first generation born with the neurological changes that had transformed their species. They could cry, laugh, and feel emotions in ways their ancestors never could. Each human child, Robert explained, showing them pictures of Emma, is precious beyond measure. They are not just offspring. They are dreams, hopes, and infinite possibilities given form. The young aliens washed with shimmering skin, their newfound emotions making them more receptive to human concepts than any previous generation. One of them raised a hand, its skin glowing with curiosity. "Teacher Robert," it asked, "how do we protect the children?" In orbit around Mars, the answer to that question was already in action. The Tall One ships now carried mixed crews, human and alien working together. They patrolled the solar system, but not as warriors. They were guardians, making sure no other species would repeat their terrible mistake. Mary Wilson had found her own way to heal. She worked in the Memorial Center's art room, where alien children learned to draw alongside human kids. Emma's original drawings hung on the walls, including the one that had first made the tall ones cry. Under it was a plaque that read, "The day we learned to feel." The guard who had fired the fatal shot, now known as Guardian, had become something unique in the galaxy. It led a special unit of tall ones dedicated to protecting human colonies. They had developed new technologies specifically for this purpose, including shields that could detect and prevent any harm to children of any species. Commander Reed and First Speaker stood in the Memorial Center's observation dome, watching the Martian sunset. The golden light played across the living metal walls, creating patterns that seemed to pulse with life. The Emma Wilson Protocol has been adopted by 17 different species now, First Speaker said. Its skin rippled with pride and sadness, a combination that would have been impossible for its kind a year ago. Every spacefaring race must undergo emotional compatibility testing before contacting new civilizations. No more children will die from misunderstandings. Reed nodded. She would have liked that. Emma always wanted everyone to be friends. In the center's main hall, a hologram of Emma played, showing her as she had been. Laughing, drawing, full of life and dreams. But instead of bringing pain, it now brought a different kind of feeling to those who watched it. The tall ones called it Emeth in their language, a word that meant both remembrance and promise. The final addition to the Memorial Center was completed that evening. A garden, carefully engineered to grow in Mars' hostile environment, bloomed with flowers from Earth. In its center stood a statue made of the tall one's living metal. It showed Emma holding hands with a young alien, both figures looking up at the stars. As night fell on Mars, Robert and Mary stood in the garden, watching the metal statue shimmer in the starlight. Guardian approached them quietly, its skin glowing with the soft colors that indicated deep emotion. "We will never forget," it said simply, "and we will always protect." Above them, the stars sparkled in the Martian sky. Among them, human and alien ships patrolled together, ensuring that the lesson learned at such a terrible cost would never be forgotten. Emma Wilson's death had changed not just two species, but the way all intelligent life in the galaxy would interact forever. Somewhere in the vastness of space, a child of a newly discovered species looked up at strange ships in their sky. But thanks to Emma, they would never know the fear that she had faced. They would only know protection, understanding, and the promise that all children, everywhere, would be safe among the stars.